Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Trash Talk. This is the show where we talk trash about whatever topic strikes my fancy or whatever my amazing guest is an expert in. And I've got it. Yeah, we're throwing out expert. That's
Me?
what's happening right. Yeah. So
Well,
we have a very special guest today. Would you please introduce yourself to the audience at home?
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. First of all, DJ. I mean, my goodness, this is such a lovely treat on a Tuesday. My name is Elliot Morgan. We've known each other for quite a few years, DJ. I
Mm-hmm.
do comedy. I do a podcast with my pals called the Valley Cast. I do another podcast called the Fundamentalists with one of my friends who is a philosopher guy, and we talk about all sorts of stuff and culture and depth psychology. I'm a PhD candidate, so I'm currently working on a dissertation in depth psychology. I hail from the state of Florida. I'm married, and I recently adopted a foster dog, and he's getting a lot more comfortable with us. I don't know if you can see him back there.
Yeah, I can. I'm going to ask you this question that everybody asks about my dog that I never have an answer to because they're also it's a mutt. So I don't know what type of dog is it.
I can tell you exactly what kind of dog he is. I could bring up his DNA analysis that we did, and
Nice.
he's got like German. Okay, so he's a poodle,
Okay.
and he's got like German Shepherd in him, and he's got some golden retriever, a lot of German Shepherd. So
Okay.
his paws are like massive, but
Hmm.
then there's some other stuff. I mean, he was like a backyard breeder dog. We decided to foster after the fires because we were like, what
Hmm.
can we do that like
Yeah.
will feel like we're contributing something? And we had a dog that passed away like a year ago, and so we were like, well, let's just foster. And he like was so scared of the like literally the wind when we first got him, and
Yeah.
he's still very skittish about things, but now we're working with him quite a bit with a trainer, and he's getting a lot better. So
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, my dog is right down here doing what she always does when we record is licking her paws, making the room real stinky.
nice. What's her
But
name?
Winona.
That's a great name.
Yeah, she's a sweetie. Oh, she heard her name. Hello. Hello. Well, no, I thank you for mentioning the Valley Cast because that is, you guys have been so lovely and had me on to promote my various projects over the years. And pretty much every time I get to go on, you'll like slip in some sort of philosophy or depth psychology little nugget. And I was like, man, I really want to talk with Elliot about this more. And so I've been doing this show, Trash Talk, and I figured this is a fantastic opportunity to do just that. But before we dive into it, I like to start every episode doing what we used to do over at OSA, which is asking you, is there something you're into, something you're watching, reading, enjoying that you'd like to share with the class?
Oh gosh, where do I begin? Great question. I just finished an essay called Oedipus Revisited. That was
Ooh.
pretty exciting stuff. I actually did really enjoy it. But I'm starting to read this book right now that was recommended to me called How to Win the Information War, or How to Win an Information War, and it's about the one of the propagandists, or like major propagandist for Hitler, and how he
Hmm.
like used propaganda to eventually kind of usurp the regime, and he became like an expert in how to deal with these kinds of things. And so this book is written, I think it came out like last year. I just started it, but it seems very, very interesting. So that's
That
what I'm on.
sounds incredibly timely.
Yes,
That sounds like a very
it's a little
yeah.
almost too timely.
Yeah, it's almost frustratingly timely. Is what
Like
that sounds like. Yeah, yeah,
you replace some of these German sounding words
yeah.
with
Yeah,
English sounding.
yeah, it's interesting too. Yeah, that sounds because I've been reading this book called Tribe by Sebastian Younger, which is kind of about how it seems mostly. I also am just starting it, so forgive me for people who have read the book if I'm summing it up wrong. But it's kind of about our social evolution.
Oh, nice.
And yeah. And so like the opening chapter kind of talks about how like back when at the founding of what we understand as the United States, a lot of people would leave the colonies and live with indigenous tribes, but the reverse almost never happened organically. Like,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and so talking a little bit about that, but I like. I'm glad stuff like that, the book that you're reading exists because it we're in a place. I'm glad somebody has a theory on the answer to this because it's like I actually kind of we're at a point now. It's like I actually don't know what you would do with the propaganda we're dealing with, to the degree that the people most responsible for spreading the propaganda are also the biggest marks for it. Because for a long time,
Yeah.
I was like, well, you know it's a lie, and I'm like, you don't.
Yeah.
You're eating the slop you're putting out as if it's new info, but you're the one putting it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what to do about
I've
this.
had some friends of a friend of mine who is not from America who
Yeah.
would like we've gotten into not arguments but like debates because he's like, there's no way they really authentically believe this, and I'm like, you don't understand, they really do, and it's
Yeah.
maybe a little bit depressing. But then I go, how much misinformation and propaganda am I just scarfing down to? But
Yeah.
I don't think it's a
Yeah.
50-50 thing either
Yeah, it's
by
tough.
a long shot.
It reminds me of I don't know if you saw that movie Civil War that came
Yeah.
out last year. And it was one of those, going into it, I was like, the director is British, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about a British filmmaker talking about a second American Civil War. And then as I
Yeah.
was watching, it's like, yeah, this was a mistake, because see, this guy thinks that, like, if you show, like we would see in grainy war footage, like cannon fire in the horizon on the American
Right.
heartland, he sees that, or like an assault on the White House. He as a British guy, he's like, that's, you guys must think that's awful. I'm like, you don't. Half of video games, this is the scenario. This is,
Yeah.
a lot of Americans think this would be awesome.
Yeah.
Think it would be great.
I too thought maybe it would be awesome back in like when I was in high school. I remember
Yes.
having that kind of like teenage war lust,
Yeah.
especially around the time of 9/11, being
Mhm.
real swept up, and then growing up a little bit and being like, oh, I guess some people just kind of stay in that mindset a little bit, and it's a little sad, but yeah, this guy who wrote this book, there's he did a TED talk, and it goes through like 3 different ways. I don't remember what they all are off the top of my head,
Yeah.
but a lot of it boils down to like you kind of leave yourself behind and almost trick them, pretend to be, like his lesson from propaganda is that you adopt a lot of their kind of lingo, but I don't know. I'm curious how much I'm going to agree with that in the book,
Yeah.
because I don't know. I hear that kind of strategy talking a lot these days, especially after the election, where people on the
Mhm.
left are very like, well, we need our own Joe Rogan and we need to do this.
Yeah.
And I think it comes off really contrived for people, but I don't
Yeah.
know what the way to do it is. So that's why I'm reading the book. We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, exactly. It is interesting too, because there's also a level of this being, while there's echoes of things that have happened in the past, as there always are, there are levels of it that are unique, and that are different, because obviously when the internet,
Yep.
AI, all that stuff is stuff that we'll have to find new mechanisms and how to process. But I think this all lines up with what I'm interested to talk with you about today, because I do think, when it comes to psychology, depth psychology, philosophy, stuff like that, I do think there's a lot of merit and a lot of importance in self-reflection, in trying to figure out, hey, why I believe this thing. Why? Why do I believe
Yeah.
it? Where is, are there grounds for it? But before we get into that, take our audience a little bit on your journey. How did you get how did you get here to where you are now?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm shocked every day.
Yeah.
Like I was looking over at my wife yesterday. I was like, this is like, it was like a Sunday afternoon, and the dog was on. I was like, this is nice. Like this is really,
Hmm.
really beautiful. But yeah, I mean, I came from Florida. I had a lovely childhood. Grew up very conservative, very Christian.
Hmm.
Um, Fell in love with theater. Always wanted to be an actor or be in entertainment in some way. Moved out to Los Angeles after studying zoology. Auditioned for a guy named Philip DeFranco.
Hmm.
He does news. He's a news guy on
If you
YouTube.
ever heard of them, anybody ever heard of them?
Killing it. And
Yeah.
he started a thing called SourceFed. Then since then, it's just been sort of like, all right, what am I? I'm like, I think a lot of it has been trying to find my voice, which is partially why I think I went back to school at the start of COVID. But now it's kind of like I'm in this almost the end of what it feels like an intermission of being like, all right, what am I actually going to do, and how am I going to put myself out there? Because I've been a little reclusive, I would say, for several years, but sometimes I think
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah. I feel similarly, and I would imagine that a lot of people feel that, post COVID, kind of like,
Mhm.
all right, And what's so cool is that right as I'm like, hey, I think I'm finally figuring out, it's like, oh, cool, new recession. Awesome. So great. Great timing.
Oh, you know, I think I'm really. Oh, there it goes.
Yeah. All right. Well, never mind. Guess we're back into reclusive mode.
Oh, I
No,
forgot catastrophes around every corner. Okay.
every corner, all the time. God damn it. But yeah, I also grew up in Florida. Also moved around a bunch as a kid, but I spent a bulk of my childhood in Florida. Also grew up in a conservative environment, conservative church environment. Which that's an interesting journey. Leaving that seems a little bit more intentional than when if I said I left it. That sounds like an intentional decision. It's just you grow
Yeah.
and you change over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's do you feel so you don't feel like a lot of people I talk to, especially if they grow up religious, because I keep up with a lot of the like there's these fundy snark influencers that are or
Mhm.
fundamentalist influencers that are very fun to kind of hate watch is a strong word, but
Yeah,
basically
yeah,
that.
I get what you mean. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But do you have that? And then there's people who quote unquote deconstruct in a very conscious way. But do you feel like a resentment toward that type of upbringing? I hear that in a lot, and I think maybe I had that at one point, but not so much anymore.
No, I really don't. I do have like I think if I were to describe where I'm at now, it would be I'm at a Christian agnosticism. I'm
Nice.
inclined to believe that there's something more than us. There's something going on upstairs. The shape that takes in my life is something that reflects Christianity because that was my upbringing, so it's something I'm familiar with. But at the end of the day, who knows, man? Who knows? Because even if you take because I was very involved in the church. I think I read the Bible cover to cover 3 times.
That is
Um,
impressive.
well, here's the thing, dude. I didn't realize at the time that no people were just showing up at the church and nobody was really taking it seriously. I took everything they were telling me
Dude,
at
same.
face value.
Yeah. I was like, I'm going to be the best Christian.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I've read the New Testament and I would be, you know, what denomination did you?
Baptist.
Baptist,
Yeah,
nice,
yeah,
nice,
yeah,
nice.
yeah. How about yourself?
Pentecostal / Assemblies
Okay.
of God. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
both denominations that are known for their well, maybe being a bit colorful, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's like I took it very seriously and I was very involved in it. But I think even if you take even I would argue even if you were able to take the scripture as which I don't know that's not the stance I'm taking, but if you were to still take it as this is from God, you're dealing with an entity, an idea that's so abstract, inherent in what it's supposed to be, that it's like even this you know what I mean? Like there's no way to understand it fully. That's part of what it
Mhm.
says in the text. So anyway, so
Yep.
that's I don't have any resentment towards it. I do have some antagonism in general to the institution
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
how the institution of the church is being utilized specifically in this country. And a lot of, I don't know about you, but there's a lot of the church I came out of, a lot of scandals after I left, a lot of people up to no good, turns out. And it's like,
Yeah.
shocker. Ooh, so surprised. Oh my God, I'm so
Well, and
surprised by this.
they're making trouble in our neighborhood, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. What
Uh,
about you? When you for me, the journey leaving that was literally almost like a physical one. I spent high school homeschooled. I went to college. That was eye opening. I'm around people that don't necessarily have the same values of me, and I go from college to LA, and that's even more. And as you integrate more people into your life, more perspectives, that's just opens up your worldview more. Was that similar to you, or was it kind of a different journey?
yeah, I mean, I tried to stay in it as much as possible and still do have an affinity for like the Christian faith. And I do
Yeah.
feel that there's value, like you were saying, uh, in the Bible, in having a faith. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think after my divorce is when I probably like it kind of, I think I felt like there was a crisis of faith, crisis of career, crisis of personal relationships.
Yeah.
And so it was all at once that I think it kind of led me down a path to taking everything apart, pulling it apart. But I
Yeah.
also think that was my way of like coping. Really, I mean, it was a
Hmm.
therapeutic
Hmm.
process, and I still think
Yeah.
it's a therapeutic process and an ongoing one. So
Yeah. So, talking a little bit about you were saying in the pandemic. Well, so I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to go back. You were studying zoology first
yeah,
back in
I like
school.
to just do weird things. I'm like, what is wrong with me? I should have found out by now in
Hmm.
one of these books, and I do kind of most of the time. I will be like, oh yeah, yeah, we're all screwed. But
Yeah.
there's something that's wrong with me. But yeah, I was going to be a veterinarian, so I studied, and also, so I remember in high school, like I was so into theater, and yet I was so into that culture that I felt like I wasn't balanced. That I was so quote unquote artsy. So I was like, I'm going to
Hmm.
go study science, and zoology looked cool, and it was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
cool
Yeah.
sounding word, and I was not good at it, and I was uh I wouldn't say I was bad, but I was definitely not a like star student. And the idea was that I was going to go to veterinary school after that. So I worked at animal hospitals for a long time. And then I was like, I just don't like this. This isn't for me. And so
Yeah.
then when I moved out to LA, I like could get a job as a veterinary technician and still like love animals. But I'm definitely, it's best for the animals that I'm not in that
Yeah.
field.
Yeah. 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 We need to write you a pilot where you're a vet tech, where you're like the veterinary
Yeah.
sitcom.
Yeah.
Feels like
That's
full
actually really,
circle to me. Yeah.
yeah, what's that?
That feels full circle to me. That feels like a
Yeah.
good, that feels like,
But he's just terrible at his job.
huh?
Bad
Exactly.
vet.
It's almost like a home improvement, but with vets where it's just like all the animals are
Yeah,
worse off.
I like that a lot.
That's interesting. Oh, because I remember when I was in I wanted to write, I wanted to direct, I want to do those sort of things. My parents were very big. I'm like, yeah, but like, how about you get a degree in technical writing? That's something you could still get a job in. And so I did
Yeah,
that for a few semesters. I'm like, this blows. I hate this.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
also a big part of it, is my parents being like, "You've enjoyed your theater, but, like,
Yeah.
no one makes it, and so you're gonna need to have a job." And I was like,
Hmm.
"Can I what about majoring in theater?" And then they were like, "You don't need to. You've been doing it. You're good." And I think
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
made a good point.
Yeah, that's not what was it similar. You're not wrong. It's similar to where I had a lot of people being like, you don't need a degree
Yeah.
in filmmaking. You just need to start making stuff. And I don't know that that's entirely worked out for me, but it did save me a lot of debt.
Yeah.
So that's not nothing. That's not nothing.
No, it is not. As someone who is accumulating it, it is quite scary, but I, have faith that Jesus will take care of me
Yeah, exactly, man.
and give me my
At this
money.
point, I say go all in. You just got to play chicken with it.
Yeah.
Who knows what the next few years look like? It's
Well,
probably
that's
not
when
going to be a big
COVID happened.
deal.
I was like, "There's no way. Like this
Yeah.
thing's going down in flames."
Yeah, man. So now we've gone from zoology to now you study depth psychology. That's what
Hmm.
you've got. That's what you're working on your thesis, your
Yeah.
dissertation. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yes.
What
I
what is depth psychology?
I don't know, man. It
Okay.
is, dude. It is like I'm still trying to figure it out. It is it's like okay. The official answer is that it is a branch of psychology that studies the unconscious.
Okay.
So it takes the unconscious as being real. Some
Hmm.
schools of psychology don't. Uh, it looks at the underlying motivations for things, basically anything that you are unaware of in everyday life. It studies
Yeah.
subjective experience. It studies what it is like to be human. It's very concerned with things like meaning and purpose and archetypal things. I study a lot of. That's like this specialty is
Yeah.
that stuff, which is essentially anything that is spread across our geography, extends through time, and mostly universal for every human.
Yeah.
Anything that a human typically goes through is archetypal, and it extends from. So Freud is kind of the father. Then he
Hmm.
had Jung. Jung came along, and Freud loved him, and they met. They were like, "Oh my God, we have this thing. We've discovered a scientific fact of the unconscious." And then Jung went a different direction. Freud was very anti-religion.
Hmm.
Jung was not so much, and so they had a breakup. And so now there's still two very opposed schools of thought within depth psychology, and then there's people who've
Yeah.
extended outside into philosophy and the Freudian realm, and then there's people who've extended beyond Jung. So I study Jung, and then Hillman, James Hillman, who's my favorite psychologist, and he developed
Okay.
a field called archetypal psychology, which deviates a little from Jungian or analytical psychology,
Yeah.
but it is also really fascinating and fun. So a lot of the stuff that depth psychology focuses on is taking these ideas and putting them out in the world rather than continuing this idea that psychology only means being in like a consulting room, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Okay. It definitely does. It definitely does. So when you say, jumping back a little bit, when you say there are fields of psychology that don't view the subconscious as real, so everything is just, I guess, for
Well,
lack of a better word, literal, like that.
you'll hear terms like subconscious, you'll hear attention. I mean, they're all kind of different theories, and I think that they're all valid. Like, I
Yeah.
think that a lot of times, for example, someone will go to a therapist and they will be depressed,
Hmm.
and someone who is more clinically oriented or cognitively oriented might say, okay, you're depressed. Here's here's a mantra you're gonna repeat every day, and we're gonna change your kind of neural pathways, and then you're not gonna be depressed anymore.
Hmm.
Whereas a more
Hmm.
depth psychological approach is going like, okay, you're depressed. What does that mean? What is your depression trying to tell you? What aspect of your personality is pulling you down and making it so that you can't function? This differs from clinical depression, but that's just like the metaphor.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
tries to find like the root cause of the symptom rather than just wiping the symptom out.
Well, I kind of, and I'm just kind of getting into this for the first time with you right now. I kind of like the latter approach, this depth psychology approach, because I think it speaks to, I'm going to phrase it this way, it speaks to the artist in me.
Yeah.
And it feels like in not so many words, but the way I would describe it is it kind of engages with the idea of, not necessarily literally, but the idea of a spirit of we're not necessarily treating, it's
Yep.
not just as easy as like, this is the disease you have, take this medicine. It,
Right.
it it deals with something more abstract, which I find meaningful.
Yeah, and that is same. And I think they're not mutually exclusive. Like, you
Hmm.
can do both at the same time. But yeah, the idea of like the kind of spirit stuff and the religious stuff, especially in archetypal psychology, that language is used very heavily. And like Hillman will
Yeah.
go into this idea of a mono or a polytheistic psyche or polycentric psyche. And the general idea is like, when you hear people go, uh, uh, everyone contains multitudes, it's basically that
Yeah.
taken to a full like school of psychology. And so
Yeah.
it's you have these different centers or hubs within your personality rather than what we're born into a monotheistic psychology, not necessarily in like a religious sense, like you believe in a
Yeah.
monotheistic, but your egoic perspective is like we walk around thinking this is all there is until something in
Hmm.
our life disrupts us, and or we say something, we go, where did that come from, or what came over me, and some complex gets activated.
It's interesting.
Don't know what
And
the
like
point
you,
was of that tangent.
yeah, no, but I like it because as you pointed out, none of these is necessarily mutually exclusive, which I like. But it does make me think about, as we kind of touched on earlier. I think coming from a religious community, it is interesting how you'll run into people that are atheist or whatever, and they're like, "Well, no, here's how this is the way things are," and it's kind of like, well, you sound like a very religious person. I know you're not, and
Very
you'd be
mono.
offended if I
Yeah.
mentioned this, but the same decision making you're doing,
Yes. Exactly.
it's the same thing. It's the same mechanism.
It's the same mode of consciousness, yeah, of
Yeah,
like you're still kind of fanatic and you're still single-minded and you're
yeah,
still, yeah, it's fascinating. And also, I mean, in terms of it speaking to like the artist in you,
hmm,
that makes total sense too, because depth psychology is kind of like in academia, there's a spectrum of the humanities to the sciences, and depth psychology is more oriented in the humanities because it looks to
yeah,
things like religion and myth, and it sees the psyche as basically like, or it sees the human as basically a conglomeration of different stories that we have told ourselves. And so you look to these stories to learn about what's going on in the unconscious, which is more, for me, more fun and rewarding than the scientific side, because
yeah.
what I learned in zoology is that I wouldn't be good at it. So God
Yeah,
bless them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was never growing up. I was never good at the maths or the sciences or any of that kind of thing. Although I do find it fascinating. I do find
It
that
is
stuff really fast.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just not built for it. So you said you started going back to school for this during the pandemic. Was there any like when you pandemic's happening? You're like, I want to go back to school. Was it immediate like depth psychology, or did you have to like root around for what you were looking for?
Yeah, it was definitely like, to be honest with you, I didn't really know what this was until I found. I was recommended the school by my therapist, and then I went to their website and I was looking at their programs, and he was like, "You should do the clinical psych route because they had that, and
Yeah.
a depth oriented clinical track." But then I saw this program, and I just read the syllabuses, and it was like an immediate like, oh my god, like I really am fascinated by this stuff. And
Yeah.
I was like, if I were to go through this entire education, I was like, is there any world in which I would regret it? I was like, this is all just the stuff I'm curious about. And it was stuff like,
Mhm.
well, we studied synchronicities, which there's a billion theories on that. One big theory or dominant one is that they're not existent. But what goes on in the person's mind when a synchronicity happens, and what are the different, schools of thought around that? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Is it diluted? That kind of stuff was just very fascinating. Archetypes, very fascinating. So I just kind of read the program and I was like, I'm going to do this. And so and it was remote.
Yeah, 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 yeah. What's
Oh,
a
and I took the
synchronicity?
mushroom trip. I did a little bit of
Yeah,
too many
yeah. Well, you
mushrooms.
got to. I mean, before you do any decide to go in any educational field, you got to do a little bit of a mushroom trip. What's a synchronicity?
Synchronicity is when outside event happens
Hmm.
that matches with your psychological state. So your dad just died on the radio.
Hmm.
You're thinking about him, and then his favorite song comes on the radio or
Oh yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I am skeptical about most of them, but I've had some pretty wild ones that got me
yeah.
into the idea. Jung coined the term, and the story he tells about a synchronicity is he had a patient in the consulting room, and it was a woman, not unlike the kind of atheistic fanatic you were sort of,
Yeah.
that not unlike that, like very rational, very rigid. And she was telling Jung about a dream that she had where there was a scarab beetle that did something in the dream, and Jung hears a tapping behind him, and then he turns around and there's a scarab beetle basically outside
Hmm.
of his window, and he grabs the beetle and he goes, "Here's your scarab," and he puts it in the woman's hand,
Hmm.
and she has like a complete breakthrough. Like all of a sudden,
Yeah.
her rigidity, her like depression, her sense of like meaninglessness completely dissipates. And it was
Yeah.
like the scarab of the dream aligned with the scarab of whatever. And then Jung goes into this whole thing about scarab being like an Egyptian symbol of, resurrection,
Yeah.
or renewal. But then you'll find out like everything's a symbol of resurrection. So what about whatever?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
get the idea. It's like
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
happens and you go, "Oh, that's weird."
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
basically what it is.
and I think everybody's had those experiences. That's really interesting. So there was a little bit when I was first reaching out to you about this. There was a little bit of confusion on my part about the distinction between philosophy and depth psychology.
Yeah.
Can you articulate what the distinction there?
Yeah, I think depth psychology is more fun.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
philosophy is more depressed. No, I think philosophy is its purpose is to like get to the truth of things. I would say,
Mm,
like, this is my understanding. People who
yeah.
know more about it can correct me, but like my understanding is philosophy is like you are trying to get to the rational, you're using reason to deduce the ultimate truths about reality,
Yeah.
why we exist, whatever.
Yeah.
Psychology is less rational and not necessarily so much about truth as it is the fictions that are always going on in our minds anyway.
Yeah.
So like philosophy is can tell you a little about love, but I think the feeling of love, the like experience of it is
Hmm.
more in the purview of depth psychology.
Gotcha. 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 So for you, like you said, you're a theater kid. You came out here. You worked in comedy. You've been doing stand up. How does depth psychology influence? How has that influenced your perspective on comedy and maybe how you perform comedy?
It's a work in progress. I definitely think they're kind of they bounce back and forth because it like when I it's almost more like comedy influences the depth cycle. Like
Mm-hmm.
my dissertation is on I'm looking at different trickster figures basically in different
Love it.
cultures and applying
Love
it
it.
to like yeah, it's very fun.
Big
And
fan of the
so
trickster figures. I love it.
yep,
Love where you're going. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, we can go to mythical trickster figures here. We have
Love it.
American Indian trickster tales, but so
Well, I
that's
think
very comedy oriented.
yeah, the
But
trickster aspect is especially so ubiquitous, especially in like superhero comic
Loki,
media. Loki, Spider Man. You know what I
yep,
mean? It's just such a great archetype. But anyway, yeah. So
yep,
your comedy's influencing your dissertation,
comic
influence
book
your
that, and then
perspective.
always, I mean, it's like in the back of my mind now, running as software, this stuff. So anytime I'm doing jokes, and there does tend to be like, you can definitely make fun of yourself when you know, everyone has a shadow. So like,
Mm-hmm.
if you know everything casts a shadow, and if you can make fun of your shadow, there is a therapeutic element of like people being able to have some catharsis through that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Shadow being the Jungian archetype of the shadow self. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Jung had this like topographical model for the psyche where it's like you have your persona and then there's your ego. That's what you're like consciously aware of. And then behind
Yeah.
that is your shadow, then anima animus, and then like the self and all the archetypes. I don't so much subscribe to that, but
Yeah.
it's a useful tool, I think. The shadow part, though, is basically your personal unconscious in the Freudian term, or just the unconscious in Freud's term, because
Yeah.
that's kind of as far as he went.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the stuff that, yeah, you repress, that you leave behind, or that society tells you is a no-no. So things like the
Um,
Oedipal complex, that kind of
which you
stuff.
were just reading
Yep.
a essay about. So is it, and this might be outside of your purview, so I apologize if that's the case. I never really thought about this before. Did we just not introspect on what's going on in the mind before Freud and Jung? Like, did we just not, we're just like, whatever.
Yeah.
It's the humors. We just need to bleed somebody a little bit and all that bad stuff will come out.
Yeah, kind of
Yeah.
not. I think the idea is the, so in myth, the idea is that they are, mythology is psychology wearing ancient
Mm.
dress,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
then psychology is mythology wearing modern dress. And so the idea is that these stories and these religions and a lot of the huge movements that have happened throughout our culture were projections of ourselves as we have quote unquote evolved. That's the wrong word,
Yeah.
because there's not, that is a problematic word for multiple reasons, but
Yeah.
as we have changed, we become more introspective. So the idea is that the gods as began as projections and then were withdrawn. And then with, you have Nietzsche. Well,
Yeah.
really, it's, you go to Descartes. So Descartes was the guy who said, "I think, therefore I am," and that is said to kind of be the marker for when everything became internal. So like the soul, he basically is going, I can doubt everything is real. I can doubt that you're out there. I can doubt that
Mm-hmm.
that God is real. The only thing I can't doubt is that I doubt. And so he was like, because I can't doubt that I doubt, I think, therefore I am. Like I doubt,
Mm-hmm.
therefore I am. And so that kind of caused, as the story goes, a
Yeah.
split where that allowed science to do science and religion to deal with the internal soul. And so
Yeah.
religion, ritual, that was basically proto psychology. And
Yeah.
then now it's very similar. Like there's the shaman is similar to the psychotherapist, or the clergyman, like going to confession is very
Mm-hmm.
similar when you go to talk to a therapist. So it has roots and all that stuff. It's just, I guess you would say modernity is where we kind of got all of these different professions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Before we kind of articulated it in as its own specific thing, as its own worthwhile thing.
Right.
Interesting. That's
Like
wild.
scholastics would be considered, like they were kind of original philosophers, and like alchemy was sort of representative of a before chemistry was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Alchemy sort of still mixed science and like spirituality, basically. So it was
Yeah.
we just hadn't untethered everything yet, and so then philosophy and psychology were bound together. Sounded like a really fun time to be alive if you didn't
Yeah,
blow yourself
for
up.
real. Well, it's interesting. I feel like we kind of underestimate how privileged we are to exist in the time that we exist in. Because even though this isn't exactly what you're talking about, there's this really excellent show created by Steven Soderbergh called The Nick, that takes place in New York at the dawn of what we would understand as modern science. And
Cool.
it is a horror. It is like a real, because they don't know what they're
Yeah.
doing. You know, so it's like when you're drawing blood, like you're cutting a person's arm open and sticking this huge tube in, because they don't,
Yeah,
they
no.
don't, in that case, they don't have the machining to create tiny needles, but
Yep.
also they don't, like when they're first what was the machine that did this? There was this machine that they had on. I don't think it was an early defibrillator, but it was an electrical machine, and a nurse gets electrocuted because
Yep.
they don't fucking know. They're
No.
figuring it out for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very
Yeah.
funny. It
Yeah.
reminds me of like, the Hippocratic Oath that's like do no
Hmm.
harm. But
Yep.
Hippocrates was a big fan of bloodletting and
Yep.
like which led to however many deaths, like more deaths happen as a result of bloodletting than is possible to know. So
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So
thanks,
I think
Hippocrates.
that's what we're kind of like talking around, this idea of how, do no harm. What that meant to Hippocrates then is something that means something different to us now. How do we come to these conclusions?
Yep.
How do we designate? And I think that's something that people in general, and if I'm being honest, like you used the term rigid earlier, and I think that is a term that's come up when I've been in therapy, and it's something that I struggle with as a person. Is I can be pretty rigid sometimes about things. I can be, which I guess in some circumstances is beneficial.
Yep.
Not so much in others, but I think what people can take for granted is this a lot of the things that are a part of our society are an ongoing conversation. Nothing is set in stone. So when people get upset about pronouns or something, but I'm just picking pronouns out of the whatever. It's like, that's not how things have been. Yeah, I understand. But also, things are always, one, all words are made up. Two, we're in a state of constant ebb and flowing and common understanding, and it can be messy and it can be frustrating. I too want things to just be the way things are, and I want them to be the way things are because
Yeah.
I deal well with routine. But guess what? That's not how the world works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, it is funny when you there's this clip of a comedian, I don't know his name, but he talks about like, isn't it crazy that we made everything up and it still sucks? Like,
Yeah.
like they turn the stock market off every night and then every morning they turn it back on.
Yes.
And he's like, they're like, it's gonna blow, and he's like, well, just turn it off. Like,
Yeah.
the stock market's crashing. Let's just say it's not.
Exactly. We made it up. That's the thing.
Real.
Money is a thing we made up, that we decided that this is the value it has, and we get to determine what that means to us as a culture, work, like all of those things, especially in a modern society when we're not, we're not hunter gatherers. Like I'm not, we don't rely on that. So the definition of work is something we made up. We made it up.
Yeah. Ooh, made that up too. I know a lot of depth psychology has been like that, in the sense of being like, I'm it's like an onion, and you go like, whoa, I inherited this. Like this is our like birthright, is to just be born into this system where it's like we are in it, we have no control, but it is also something that we all made, that we, and you go, oh, that's another assumption I have, that's another assumption. I'm like, whoa, this just never ends, until eventually you're like, am I real? And then you have a mental break, and then you take a nap and you're fine.
Yeah. That's that's a key, kids, especially, some of the younger people out there. You're starting to go down a philosophical, theological, psychological rabbit hole. So just take a nap, man. Just take a break. It'll be fine. It'll be all good.
Or I'll just go volunteer somewhere. That's going to be a lot,
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, that's a really good point. Because you can hypothesize, get theoretical, everything. Sometimes it's good to just get out there and help people. You got to go get outside of your own head. I do want to ask you about, because I don't know if you've noticed this too, where people who, I guess the question is there a wrong way or a less beneficial way to share psychological, philosophical ideas? Because you've seen examples of people using therapy speak to kind of like
Yeah.
justify their shitty behavior or
Yeah.
whatever. And so I wonder, as you know, you and I are both content creators. We're both out there sharing ideas. And assuming similarly, you'll have to think about like, what's the right way to share? The best way, a responsible way to share this idea, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. You see, I mean, that's a good example that you gave because I was thinking the one that came to mind was someone that I would venture to say neither of us are huge fans of, which is Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
which is closely related. He's a huge Jung fan. Um, I think what it boils down to, I think the word is prescriptive. Not being that, I think, is good. Like when people
Yeah.
use these ideas to try to tell other people how to be, I think it's not necessarily a good thing. I also think they can be weaponized, like you're saying, with like the therapy speak.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like I try to stay away from therapy speak so much just because of that reason. And I also think
Mhm.
it's like we're just upset. Like some I've been okay. This is a weird tangent that I'm going to go on
Go
here,
for
but
it.
like there is this trend that I'll see where these posts go viral and they're just like naming terms. It'll be like this is called emotional
Yep.
trademarking or
Hmm.
something, and then
Yeah.
people are like, I love that term." And Hillman talks about this in Revisioning Psychology, which is a very good book. Sorry if you can hear a trash can. Um, but the act of naming stuff gives us such like a sense of structure and comfort, and it's
Hmm.
also mythically rooted. Like it goes back to Adam and it goes back to Apollo. Adam's job was to, as I don't know if you've ever read the Bible, but his job was to name the animals. Apollo,
Yep.
same thing. And it's just like it's a different lens to see it through. But yeah, I think that like another safe way of doing it is you go, hey, this person thinks this, and that's
Yeah.
it. And you don't have to say and
Exactly. Yeah.
endorse
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's plenty of stuff that Jung says or Freud says that like I'm like I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is dangerous out there. I wonder about that too, like in terms of personal brand, where it's like I don't like the idea of being the therapist. That wasn't like
Yeah.
my interest, and so I think that there's value in actually also not going to therapy sometimes because people when
Hmm.
they go to therapy it can there's a book I love called We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse, and they talk a lot about how you go to therapy and it can actually snuff out the political the your inner citizen or your political
Hmm.
activist. It can give you a sense that you're doing something when really all you're doing is numbing yourself. Like you are going in there and because you're so focused on self-reflection, the world is burning down around you. And I
Yeah. Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's a real danger, especially with therapy speak, where people will go, well, that's just my such and such disorder.
Yeah.
Do you get ADHD memes all the time?
All the time, man. And I don't want to be, sorry, gang, I don't want to be dismissive. Obviously, I'm not out here trying to say ADHD is not a thing or anything like that.
No,
But
no,
I
neither am I,
do,
to be very
yeah,
clear.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I do wonder how much of it is like, is it ADHD or is it because or maybe they're not mutually exclusive, you know what I mean? Or is it because we grew up in an environment where we have these blinking devices
Exactly. That's
that
what
are
it is. Yeah.
demanding our attention all the time? And so now we're not able to sit down with our thoughts
Yeah. That would
ever.
be it. And it's, yeah, it is kind of like going, it's bringing it back into the brain. And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but it's also look around. Like, as
Yeah.
I'm trying to describe this, there's a loud ass, garbage truck
Hmm.
going by. And,
Yeah.
everything is chaos all the time, and then people like get pissed off at someone in traffic, and they go into
Hmm.
like a therapy session, and then the therapist is like, well, this goes back to your dad, and it's like,
Yeah.
or it goes back to the fact that there's too much damn traffic. Like, why
Yeah,
don't
there's too
you
much jam traffic.
go
We've
to a
all been
town meeting?
sold the idea that freedom equates to having a little metal box that's all my own, that
Yeah.
I now spend a majority of my life in for some reason. But if you try to take it away, if you try to say like maybe public transit, I'm going to get real mad about it.
No, yeah, you're not gonna take
Yeah,
this.
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, and I think. Sorry, gang, that this is where my brain goes back to, but it does, for me. It kind of comes back to the way this our society, our culture wants to commodify
Yeah.
everything, like
Yeah.
everything, you know what I mean? And it so has to become, and I think to your point, which again, I don't think either of us are saying don't go to therapy. I think therapy
Nope.
can be very helpful, but it is similar
Absolutely.
to going to the doctor, where you need to find one that fits and everything. But it makes me think of social media and how, in a way, it is engineered to make us complacent. Where
Yeah.
it feels like, and this is something I struggle with, where like, well, I posted about it, so I did my civic duty, and it's like,
Yep.
bro, you didn't do shit.
Yeah. Dude, I remember when that. Do you remember the Black Square debacle?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was that.
yeah.
That was the time where I was like, I know this isn't. I know this is performative, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried that if I don't do the performance, it will
Yeah.
seem like I'm not supportive. And then I did, and then I was like, everyone together was like, yeah, that probably wasn't. It was like the next day where we all
Mm-hmm.
collectively were like, ooh, that was kind of a dick
Yeah.
thing to do.
So, but I think this goes back to kind of what you're talking about. To what degree is everything performative? You know what I
Most
mean? Is everything? You know what I mean? Like everything we kind of do is performative.
Yeah.
Is that kind of part of depth psychology? Is that kind of that acknowledgement, or am I off base?
No, I think that's very much. I mean, one major thing in it is, yeah, the storytelling, the performance. It's
Yeah.
also like there's a line from a poet that Hillman will reference a lot called, or where he says, the poet's Alden, and the line is, "We're lived by powers we pretend to understand." So, like, there's performances
Mm-hmm.
happening all the time through us, and we're also seeing other people's performances. So it is, and then he refers to this thing as the poetic basis of mind. Like at the very bottom of the psyche is fantasy. It is
Yeah.
myth. It is making it's fiction. Like it is all fiction at the end of the day,
Yeah.
which is, gets a little depressing.
It gets a little
It's kind of
depressing,
fun though.
although having not really followed that thread to, I'm not going to say it's natural conclusion, a conclusion. I do, me as somebody that is sees themselves as a writer, I do see value in the idea of, well, if it's all performance, then it all kind of comes down to how well you're telling your own story.
Yeah,
And I find comfort in that,
yeah.
because that's something I've spent a lot of time figuring out, is how do you tell a story good?
Yeah. It is kind of freeing and makes it less like it takes some of the depressive nature of life off a little bit, I think, when you
Yeah,
can be like, this is kind of crazy. Like there's
yeah.
so much and we don't know anything. Like, and it
Mm-mm.
is all of these theories that it's like these brilliant minds are all trying to talk about the same thing that they can't quite like get their fingers on. And
Yeah.
it's crazy that their stuff lives on and then we read them and we go like it gives you insight, but then you're still like this is a life is very complex, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and what I like about that, when you're talking about reading these people's works, it makes me think about one of the things I love about art is, it is a way to communicate with somebody through time and space. Like I could look at somebody's work from decades ago; they're long dead, and they're trying to articulate a human feeling that I might not even, like you've mentioned it, I might not even agree with it. But now I've never met this person. I was born after they're dead, but we're communicating. We're having a moment,
Yeah, totally.
outside of physical interaction.
That honestly, that's like the one when I'm reading a book and it is actually like it grabs you or a piece
Hmm.
of art, but like it
Yeah.
usually happens with me with the reading.
Yeah.
It is kind of there's like almost a telepathy thing that happens where I'm like, I can
Hmm.
understand why people believe in telepathy because it is like you are in communication with a person
Yes.
who is dead. And
Hmm.
you're like, when I was first reading Jung, I was like, I don't know if I agree with all this guy's theories, but there's something about his writing where I feel like he's articulating something that is so current and modern for where I'm at right now. And it's like the fact that you can do that with people across time and space is like the coolest thing.
Well, and it's something I think it goes back to a religious conversation with anybody that reads the Bible and felt like, they are communicating with something greater,
Yeah.
which, not to discount. This is not me trying to discount the spiritual connection of that, but you are. I mean, you're part of that. This human endeavor to figure out. You're now connecting with this human endeavor to figure out, what does it mean to be me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
nice. It's like that, and you got to do that at some point. I do think, yeah, you make your life doing that, then it gets kind of bad. But who am I to talk? I'm sitting here studying this for year after year. I keep
Yeah.
telling my wife, like, when I'm done with this, I'm not. I don't want to learn anything
Done
anymore.
learning. I
Yeah.
did it. Mission accomplished. What is the for depth psychology? You mentioned that it's kind of different than I forget the term you used, but necessarily like being in a room, doing leading therapy session. This is the wrong way to phrase it. Like, what are the practical? Are you then doing writing books? Like, what do you
Oh,
do
like just
with?
vocationally?
Yeah, not necessarily vocationally, because I don't love the idea of limiting everything to like, how do you get paid doing it? I don't necessarily see value in that. But what are the what's the word I'm looking for? What are the use cases
Yeah.
for that?
It kind of that's a good question because I'm not interested in doing the clinical like one-on-one therapeutic session, and that is like the go-to profession.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my aim is to use it for comedy, but also really like to look at culture, like to have some kind of positive impact uh, on culture at large, especially now because
Yeah,
it feels like everything is falling off the wheels and has been feeling like that for a long time,
yeah,
even whether
yeah,
it's just even in an apolitical level.
yeah.
I think that there's a collective sense of like something's off. And I also think there's a
Mm-hmm.
numbness that's going around where people aren't even like Freud found his cases through hysteria cases, and then you worked with schizophrenic patients. And there is this theory now that like the major symptom of culture is basically numbness. Like we're so dissociated from even having symptoms that we don't even know that oftentimes when we're depressed. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I was like, before I went, I was like, okay, I like being a writer and I like thinking about this stuff and I like talking to people. Um, I'm going to try to cobble this together and have some kind of foundational view. And so we'll see what happens. But other people in my cohort are all over the place. They work in businesses. There's a lot of like folks who will do organizational business stuff. There's
Yeah.
I don't know. It's yeah, all over the place. So
Do you have a sense? Because I that what you said kind of really resonated with me because I have a sense right now of like, okay, I don't really get to just dick around. I need to figure out. I mean, I can. I just don't necessarily. I see more value in like if I'm going to exert this energy, I want it to be towards making things better.
yeah.
And part of that conversation is what does that mean? What does better look like, and for whom? But do you have a similar sense of like, cool, comedy's great. How can I use that? How can I use my platform to
Mhm.
better people?
Yeah, and not in a way that comes off. I don't know. A lot of it is like when you see these guys on the internet that like the motivational dudes that
Mm-hmm.
are like, get out. Like I don't want to do that. I don't want to hit people over the head with it. I think that there's like
Yeah.
ways to help and also to just kind of make people think a little differently, not because the way they're thinking is wrong. There's just more fun ways to think. Like it's
Yeah.
enjoyable to be able to hold things lightly and like hold
Mm-hmm.
symptoms
Mm-hmm.
lightly,
Mm-hmm.
not freak out, not get so bogged down by things, and to be able to flip things around and like see the underside. Like know that your best laid intentions are going to have something about them that is a quote unquote shadow. Like they're like
Yeah.
there's going to be some like the Hippocrates or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that would be the goal. And it does. There is a sense of like when I was doing comedy years ago, I just was on stage at one point and I started to feel like, this isn't fun. And like, there's something
Mm-hmm.
empty feeling about this. And it felt like I was just doing it to do it.
Yeah.
And so there is a selfish element to that of being like, I don't want to feel that. I want to feel like, that there's something backing, a perspective backing the silliness and the stupidity. And if
One
there's
hundred
not, even
percent.
better.
Yeah, 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 yeah. 100%. And I think that's one of the I think people underestimate is that a lot of times trying, it does come from you're helping yourself, and there's a selfishness to like doing good and doing, you know what I mean. And I don't necessarily think that's a negative, but you made me think. You're making me think about It's right on my mind. I just finished it last night. There was this. It was an AMC show that got canceled and got moved over to Netflix, and so I watched the second season of it. It was an animated show called Pantheon that dealt with this idea of the sci-fi conceit is uploaded intelligence. We're going to copy a person's brain and put it into a computer. And in the final episode, no spoilers for everybody, but in the final episode, a character is trying to deal with a pretty heavy decision, and they're at like some sort of like mineral, like a museum, and there's this meteorite that's like 1 billion years old, and she has a moment touching it where she's like, this thing, and she's like, I'm thinking about the 1 billion years it took to get to this moment, and then the 1 billion years after this moment that I won't even be around. And that made me kind of realize like there's no mistake I could make that will matter in 1 billion years. And I was like, that's gonna that you're articulating something I've heard articulated before, but for some reason in this moment I'm like, this is going to stick with me. I'm going to spend some time thinking about this.
About the meteor?
No, yeah, but about this idea, because I exert a lot of energy of like, what's the right decision? How do I not mess up? Especially now, as it feels like the stakes are higher. I've spent a lot of time of like, whatever. We don't need to get into all that, and then kind of that kind of acknowledging that, like, yeah, man, but universe has been around 1 billion years before you. It's going to be around 1 billion years after you. So maybe loosen up a little bit.
Yeah, it's really okay. Hey, you're like a speck of dirt. You're going to be all right.
It's gonna be okay.
And then the other side of that is, I am the most unique. This is the only time this life will. This personality, this exact personality, will be around, and so in that sense. Very beautiful. And then you go back to the ocean.
Well,
walking each other home.
I like that too, and I think that that's an also important thing, that two seemingly contradictory ideas can exist at the same time. I wanted to ask you. So we kind of threw some deserved shade at Jordan Peterson, in my opinion. Is there anybody out there in the kind of philosophy, depth psychology space that you think is doing a good job kind of conveying these ideas to people?
One of my best friends in the world, Dr. Peter Rollins. He's written excellent books on philosophy. He follows a guy named Zizek. Are you familiar with him?
No.
You should look up Zizek, dude. He's Zizek. He is so fun to watch because he is like this. You can imagine how he sounds. He looks like his name is spelled, if that makes any sense.
Got it.
Insane, and he's got like nasal problems, where he's like constantly hitting his own face. But he's fantastic, and so in that world, and that whole lineage is a very interesting like group of thinkers. The Lacanian stuff mixes in a lot of kind of Marxist thought, if you're into that kind of thing. But in terms of who else these days would I say is like really good to listen to? I don't know, philosophy wise. I mean, I always reference Hillman. I've probably done it like 19 times in this hour. I don't know. I'll have to give some thought. I'm trying to think if I'm like actually actively listening. You know what keeps coming to mind? This is not a philosopher. I was getting on. So I started doing this. After this, I got to film a video for this channel called Rebel HQ. And it's like me putting myself out there for politics. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that was because I listened to this podcast with a guy named Michael Brooks. And he was like talking about Hillman. He was talking about politics. And so it was psychology and politics, two favorite things. And then I found out he died. And he died. I listened to him on a plane to the point that I was like, I love this guy. I want to be friends with this dude. He's my age. We're into the same stuff. I'm going to try to reach out to him. He's in New York, and I get off the plane and I'm like, he's gone. And he died like a year ago. And he wrote a book called Against the Web, which is specifically about, at the time, known as the intellectual dark web.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
And it's a great book by Zero Books. And he like really motivated me, weirdly enough, because I was like, he died suddenly at the age of like 37 and I'm 38. Oof. And he had like a neck thing that it took him out immediately. And so he continues to be, speaking of like existing across time and space, a huge, huge influence on me. So sometimes when I'm like, I'm like, okay, what do I just want to put on? I'll just turn on another Michael Brooks thing. So highly recommend.
Incredible. So before we wrap up here, were there anything we didn't touch on that you want to like mention before we go? Any final thoughts?
I hope I just didn't bounce around too much. I felt like I was a ping pong ball there. So
That's the nature of the
apologies.
show. You've met the assignment. That's what we're
Perfect.
supposed to do over. Yeah. Yep.
I
Well,
understood
dude,
the assignment.
you understood the assignment. Well, man, I hope we get a chance to talk about this stuff more. I find this stuff really fascinating. I love talking to you.
Dude, if your audience has not completely fallen asleep, I'd absolutely love to do it. I nerd out over this stuff, and it's amazing when anyone is even remotely interested in it. I mentioned it to my wife, and her eyes glaze over. And it's like, same with like on the podcast. There's a reason I like throw it in every now and then, because you can just they're cool
Sneak it
about
in
that.
there. No, I find it so fascinating. And it might be, there might be some overlap with us coming from a religious background of
Totally.
like this understanding of what makes, because I know for me, and people will probably find it in my work, a lot of time I'm very interested with the idea of what makes somebody good. What is the nature of being when you're trying to be a good person? What does that look like? What does that mean to different people? So this idea of the mechanism of what makes us us. To me, I think it's a vital part of human existence. I think even if you guys are asleep at home, I do recommend take some time, think about if you're mad about something, if you're worked up about something, take the time to try and figure out why. Try and think about what's motivating that. And it's not even necessarily to circumvent it. It's just to understand yourself and others better.
Well said. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's you don't have to solve it, but you can kind of make peace with it, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly. Make peace with it, and in certain cases, make it not everybody else's problem. You know, make it.
That's what Jung says. Is the task of your life is just to withdraw your projections from other people, and I haven't done that yet, but it's actually impossible.
We're all on this journey together.
Yeah.
We're all trying to do the impossible together. Elliot, remind the kids at home where they can find what you're working on.
Probably Instagram.com/Elliott Morgan. ELLIOTTMORGAN. Apparently, you can catch me on Rebel HQ as well. So
check that out.
We'll see how that goes.
You can find me at DJ Talks Trash. If you want to check out videos like this or the stuff I do over at Only Stupid Answers, you can do that. Catch it early at patreon.com/Only Stupid Answers. The campaign for the Kickstarter for my latest comic, Danger Boy, has completed, but by the time this video comes out, the pre-order store will be open. So if you missed it, you still want to grab a copy, please do. Would appreciate it. You can go to dangerboycomic.com, check that out, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.